a nice day, the sky is blue, fish are flying.
Too medium. You have a very good skill.
Well, it's too much supply, not enough demand, and both the rise in supply and the fairly slow pace of demand growth that we've seen recently, which contributed to this price. They're themselves consequences of several years of extremely high prices. So we had prices very elevated for a long time.
Yeah.
This encouraged research in shale oil, shale gas. New technologies were developed that would not have been economical before, and now they have unlocked a very large resource. It's changed the picture. On the demand side, with prices extremely high, this has been an incentive for consumers to try to not consume too much, to rein in consumption. Maybe also had some impact on economic growth, slowed the recovery a bit.
Yeah.
So, in 2014, demand growth was exceptionally weak, much weaker than anybody expected, especially in the second quarter, just before the price started to drop like a stone. And at the same time, supply growth, especially in the US, but across the non-OPEC region, surged to a record. So the combination, record growth in supply, very slow growth in demand, you had a big build-up in stocks and the price responded. This was not unexpected. We published the medium-term oil market report every year. For several years, we have been indicating in our balances that there would be a huge increase in OPEC spare capacity. And the OPEC spare capacity is just another way of saying there's going to be too much supply. Well, they decided that, well, you have to ask them the question, right?
Yeah.
They know why.
Yeah.
But I think the decision makes sense in a way, because the problem of cutting supply to support the price is that there's a risk that you're just going to subsidize production from higher cost producers. So I think their concern was that they have been losing market share. OPEC has been losing market share for the last few years. And I think a concern was that should they cut production more, they would just give up market share. And it would allow other producers to continue producing at a high cost, and that would do nothing for them. So I think there's some clear logic behind this decision.
International oil companies are very jeopardized by the low oil price.
Right.
Who is the winner and loser?
Among the companies?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure I want to pick individual losers and winners, and I'm not an investment advisor here.
Yeah, but economically, invest
in private, I can tell you, which stock to pick, but not. It's not my job. It's not my. No, but I think for all companies, the drop in price means that they have to revisit their plans.
Yeah.
No company could avoid looking at their projects, seeing where they can cut some fat, where they can throw out some projects to keep the ship floating, right? I don't think there's any exception. But of course, some companies can do better than others, depending on their portfolio, depending on the cost of their projects, on a number of reasons. But one thing you have to keep in mind: it's often been said recently in the last few years that production costs have gone through the roof. But they've gone through the roof partly because of the high price, and partly because producers have become kind of complacent, have become poorly disciplined about reining in costs. So this price drop has already caused costs to come down. It's not as expensive now to hire services to produce oil as it was just a few months ago. And it's also an incentive for producers to exercise more discipline, more budget discipline, to streamline their operations, to become more efficient. And the ones that will benefit the most from the low price are the companies that will be most able to cut their costs and to make their operations more efficient. You know, it's a moving target. It's changing all the time. The cost of shale production are coming down very fast. So there's not a magic number that you have to reach. You have to keep watching. It's a very dynamic market, very dynamic industry. Costs are changing constantly. So it's not a fixed equation. But you know, you asked about winners and losers, and some projects are more or less price elastic. And some projects, you know, if you have invested in and the investment has been committed, they will continue producing even if the price drops because the cost is sunk. Shale oil, light title, is different because it has a very short lead time, very short payback time, and you have to keep drilling to produce. So it's a much more price elastic type of supply. And that production is likely to come down faster, but also to come back up faster once the price starts rebounding. Well, shale gas has many impacts on the energy market. First of all, the shale gas technology is the same that unlocked the shale oil, right? So it had, in terms of the technology, it's the same thing. Yeah. It's developed huge production in the US. Now, this success can be replicated elsewhere. There's a lot of resources in Argentina, in Russia. Eventually, you know, there will be shale or shale gas, light oil developments in those countries as well. But I think what's happening with the gas market is that slowly but surely the gas market is becoming a bit more global and international. So there's going to be more liquefaction and more of a global international market in gas. And that also means more competition between gas and oil, including in sectors that for a long time seem to be dedicated to oil. I'm thinking about the transport sector, you know, cars, ships. Increasingly now, there's interest and it makes economic sense to start developing some gas-fired vehicle fleets, ships, and this is changing the picture in a very big way. It's happening faster than we thought. So in China, we're seeing a development of the gas vehicles, buses, trucks. That's happening for, you know, partly for environmental reasons too, because it's cleaner burning type of fuel. So there's interest in cities like Beijing, which are very congested with smog and pollution issues. There's a very strong interest in cleaning up the emissions, and so this is creating a lot of support for gas, but it also makes economic sense. In the US, where you have so much shale gas production and the market doesn't know what to do with it, there's a search for market outlets. And now with the price of oil falling, it's changing the equation a little bit. But the surge in gas really has created an economic case for converting more of the transportation fleet, trucks, buses, even trains, to something like LNG or CNG. And we're seeing this is a movement that's still in its infancy, but it's happening and it's spreading fairly fast. There's a few issues. There's an overhang of production and an overhang of stocks that needs to be cleared. Yeah. So the price has to go down enough for that clearing to take place. And it might not be a straight line down or straight line up. There might be some moves. Yeah. But there's a need for rebalancing. Yeah. And the rebalancing will happen. Actually, you know, late January, early February, already signs of perhaps a little bit of a slowdown in the decline, perhaps a little bit of a rebound. Yeah. There's still room for the drops to go down further. Yeah. But the point is, whenever there's a price collapse, the market rebalances eventually. Yeah. And it will rebalance. It's rebalancing as we speak. There's cuts in investment, cuts in spending. But it's not going to be the same rebalancing as took place during previous price drops. This is not the first time that the price drops. Every 10 years or so, there's a big collapse in the price. In 1986, in 1997, in 2008, we've had price collapses of similar magnitudes, even larger sometimes. And every time it rebounds. In this case, it will be a little bit different. it will rebound. In my view, it's not going to go back to the high levels that existed just before the price collapse. Two main reasons. One, the market is becoming more elastic with light oil. So there's a faster response. And the faster response means that there's going to be less overshooting and undershooting. In typical market cycles, the price collapses. It takes a long time for the investment response to translate into production. By the time it translates into production, it's overdone, and there's too much cuts, and then the market tightens, it swings back all the way up, and so on. It's less likely to happen this time. We're likely to have a more moderate cycle because the market is more flexible, more responsive. And the other thing is on the demand side. Demand is changing. Natural gas is making inroads into the oil market, into types of energy use that used to be really the province of oil, but no longer the case. Renewables are becoming more affordable in many countries. Solar, wind energy is becoming part of the energy power generation mix in a big way. This is having an impact on oil, it's having an impact on coal in China, and therefore indirectly on oil, because the coal industry in China needs a lot of oil for transportation. So there's many changes happening on the demand side, on the supply side, which will change the nature of this rebound. And in future, oil is not going to be at $40 or at $50. It's probably going to be higher, but it might not be triple digits as it was in the last 3 years. It's probably, in my view, assuming no major disruption, in producing countries, but it's probably going to settle lower at a new equilibrium price, significantly below the price of the last few years.
Yeah.
As I said, I think we might be moving to a new age where it's not the super cycle, it's the medium cycle, kind of maybe a more moderate cycle because of this flexibility that shale production allows. It's a different type of economics, of production economics, and it might not be the same kind of super cycle as we've seen. Expectations of demand growth have been changed. China is changing its economy. There's a lot of things going on the demand side, efficiency, fuel switching. On the production side, it's a more flexible type of production so far. Now, of course, we could have surprises, and we've had many surprises in the last few years. We had the Arab Spring phenomenon in North Africa and the Middle East, disruptions in Libya, disruptions in Iraq, in Yemen, in Syria, many countries. With the low oil price, you have an increase in political instability in those producer countries that need a very high oil price and that don't have a very large buffer. In a country like Saudi Arabia, they need a high oil price to fund their budget, but there are very large buffers. There's lots of cash reserves. Same thing in most GCC countries. But if you look at Iran, if you look at Venezuela, if you look even at Algeria, there's some reserves, but even there, the capacity of the economy to sustain a very low price is limited, and there's an increase in political risk in those countries. So we could have surprises. But this low price also works the other way, because it creates an incentive for producers to produce more, not less. We talked about OPEC cutting or not cutting production, but in fact, for many countries, if the oil price drops, they will want to make up in volume what they're losing in the per barrel price. So when the price rallied, in the last decade, between 2003 and 2008, you had this huge increase in resource nationalism. Countries raising their royalties, their taxes, trying to capture more of the rent. With the price now going the other way, the incentive is the opposite. It's to bring in investment, bring in investors, lower the tax, lower royalties, make it hospitable for investors to come in and boost production. And this is not, by the way, completely maybe coincidental if Mexico is going through this process now, because their production has been falling. As long as the price kept increasing, they could take the drop in production. But with a drop in price and a drop in production, you need to bring investors. Yeah. Well, the honest answer is we don't really know, because since World War II, the experience with deflation has been very limited, mostly limited to Japan, right? And the experience with Japan is that in a deflationary environment, a low price might not stimulate demand. In fact, during the big period of deflation in Japan, we had price decreases in yen terms, and yet oil demand fell, and the economy did not really get a big boost. So there's a concern that in a deflationary environment, we might see some adverse effects from the low oil price, because it feeds into expectation of deflation. It contributes to deflation, and therefore people hold back from investing because they say it's going to be cheaper in a year. If I invest now and my competitor invests in a year or 2 years, I'm going to be at a disadvantage. So that increases saving rates, and so that can be the problem. At the same time, it's true also that low oil prices means higher disposable income for households, lower input costs for industry. So it's not a straightforward picture. It's a mixed picture, and we're going to be watching it very closely, because honestly, the amount of economic research that's been done on this topic is almost non-existent. There's very little research on oil prices in deflation. There's very limited research on deflation altogether. Now, this is not something that there's a lot of research on inflation, but not on deflation. So I wouldn't presume too much, because we have to recognize the limits of our understanding and of our experience, but we're going to be watching it very closely. But I think it's clear that it's not going to be a straightforward picture. We're not in the situation of the 90s, where a lower price was clearly a boost to the economy. It might be a benefit in some cases, but it's not going to be as straightforward as it has been in the past.
Is it true?
No, I think you're absolutely right, and that's our view here at the IEA. It's a great opportunity for governments to cut on subsidies, to reduce subsidies, to dismantle the subsidy programs. We know that subsidy programs don't really work. They don't really benefit those for whom they're intended, and they're very costly. And this is a perfect opportunity, as the price drops, to reduce the subsidies. And thankfully, many governments are taking steps in that direction. That also means that the benefit of low prices might not be as great, because consumers will not see that price. And if you add currency swings on top of that, the fact that the dollar is going so strong compared to other currencies, consumers at the end of the day might not see such a big price decline. But it's an absolutely appropriate response for governments to these low prices. It's an opportunity to dismantle programs that were a problem and that can be now phased out. Well, I think it's fair to expect that there's going to be more consolidation. Every time there's a big drop in the oil price, you tend to see consolidation. That was the case in the 1990s, when the price dropped in 97. There was a big wave of mergers and acquisitions that followed in the oil industry. We're seeing the beginning of this today. We saw Halliburton and Baker Hughes merge. We're seeing it in the service industry. We're starting to see it in the oil industry itself, and some companies have indicated they're going to be, looking out for targets. So, sure, I mean, every time there's pressures on economics, need for companies to cut costs, this is an incentive for, some consolidation, some mergers and acquisitions. So we expect that to happen.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Yep.